I mentioned that, and it's the beginning of last week's reading we just had on Shabbos. Hashem had said to Avraham that if he goes to the land that he will show him, I will make your name great. I will bless you, and you become a great nation. What is this referring to? So Rashi, according to one of his interpretations, based on Midrash, he said that in the Amidah, Agado Shmecha, I will make your name great, meaning you will have renowned. Well, we will say you'll be known as Elokei Avraham. And you will be blessed when they refer to your son Yitzchak, who's the second patriarch. He will be referred to as Elokei Yitzchak. Agadlo Shmecha, your name will be great. That they will say Elokei Yaakov. So each of these blessings is referring to that how God will refer to them. They refer to as Hashem is the God of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Maybe when you conclude the first bracha in the Amidah, you will conclude with all three patriarchs, Mogen Avraham, B'chol Chosman, you will be the blessing. The other two, Yitzchak and Yaakov, will not be mentioned, only you. So we want to explain that we just read that Avraham, at the age of 99, was told to have himself circumcised, and simultaneously says, after the circumcision, and the land will be the land of your children, of your progeny, and also your name will no longer be Avraham, Abram, it will be Abraham. He added a hey to his name. Sarai, her name was Sarai, will no longer be Sarai, it will be Sarah. Just as he has the hay added to his name, she will have the hay added to her name. And the two of you will have that child. And that child will be like the stars of the heaven. That's what they will be. One of the interpretations, I will make your name greater, mean I will add to your name the hay, so your name will become a larger name. It's not no longer Abraham, it'll be Abraham, Avraham. And Rashi explains that the numerical value, Avraham, with the hay added, is Ramach, is 248. The 248 corresponds to all parts of the human body. You'll be a perfect person. Until now, you were fully in control of your physicality. Now your physicality, having the hay, you are fully functional as a spiritual person. Meaning that your ability to control every aspect of your being will be under your control. That's the hay, that's Ramach. Now, I'd once mentioned that the Torah tells us that Aaron and his children were chosen to be the Kohanim, the priests. They were installed on the 8th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan to take on a permanent role as the officiants of Hashem, known as Kohanim. Aaron was only qualified to officiate, and his children, only if they would wear the priestly vestments. Without the vestments, they were like a non-Kohen officiating, and therefore the service is not valid. And the Gemara, the Talmud says, if they're wearing their vestments, then they're considered functional Kohanim, priests. If they're not wearing their vestments, then they're no different than an ordinary Jew officiating, which has no value. The vestment, together with their pedigree, being the Kohen, allows the service to be valid and effective. And the Torah refers to the vestments as the vestments will be lekavod u'tiferes, will be for honor and glory. When they wear those vestments, they will be for honor and glory. Both the high priest, who has 8 vestments, and the ordinary Kohen has 4 vestments. But whatever it is, it's for covered and tiferes. It's for honor and glory. So I'd mentioned the Gemara asked a question. The first 7 days of the inauguration of the Mishkan, Moshe officiated. Aaron was only installed on the 8th day with his children. So the Gemara asks, the Talmud asks, when Moshe officiated for those 7 days, what did he wear? Did he wear vestments or did he not wear vestments? Or what vestment did he wear? So the question was asked to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva went and inquired, and he came back with the answer. He wore a white tunic. A white tunic. So I mentioned the name of the Shalah Kodosh. That what does that mean? That Moshe did not need a vestment to validate his service. Aaron and his children need vestments to validate the service. And without it, it was not a valid service. Moshe didn't need it. The white tunic was only to cover his nakedness. Why? What's the reason? So he goes to explain that when God created Adam, he was created with a soul and with a physicality, which is body. So the context of choice was due that he was a physical human being and with a infusion of a soul. Now there's a challenge, and there can be challenges. Do you allow the soul to have the upper hand and make the right choice, or the physicality will actually have the upper hand and it won't be the right choice? Adam was given a challenge. Don't eat of the tree of knowledge. He failed. And what is the tree of knowledge? The Torah goes is very specific. It's the fruit which is good and evil. When he ingested, ate that fruit, he himself is the center of the universe. That means everything created was created to accommodate his needs, and being the core of everything, when he became infused with evil, I'll use a more extreme word, he became putrefied with the evil of the tree of knowledge, that fruit, the whole world became putrefied. So what initially was the vestment, the Torah tells us Adam initially and Eve, they were naked in the Garden of Eden. Because their physicality was not in any way tainted with evil. So what was his vestment? His vestment was his body. The body itself was the vestment of the soul. What happens if the vestment now becomes disqualified? Because it's putrefied. So the body no longer could be the vestment. So you have to compensate, you need a new vestment. Every human being is a descendant of Adam, including Aaron and his children. So for them to officiate, the body no longer qualifies to be the vestment. So what is the vestment? Which is prescribed by God to be the equivalent of the original body. The Kohen, the high priest, wears 8 vestments, and it's very specific. And the ordinary Kohen wears 4 vestments. But that is the equivalent of, so the vestment of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, what does it correspond to? The soul needed a vestment, which is 248. That's why the body itself has 248 components to it, parts to it. That is the number that the vestment has to be to facilitate the challenges for the soul. So now that the body has been disqualified, you need something to be the equivalent of the body. That means in the spiritual realm, the vestment, which is prescribed, that's seen by God, has to meet certain specifications. That is the equivalent of 248. So when he wears that vestment, that's for honor and for glory. We read about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu had, not only was he the greatest Jew ever walked the face of the earth, the most humble person and the greatest prophet, the Torah tells us he radiated holiness, where people, they could not look at him. That was the intensity of his holiness. Meaning Moshe had actually had purified his physicality and had advanced it to such a level that the body itself could function as the vestment. Moshe didn't need a vestment. The original body was the vestment. So why did he wear white tunic? Only out of respect to cover his nakedness. But in terms of what was his vestment of service as an officiant, it was his body. His body was the original 248, which was the vestment for the soul. And as I mentioned, the name of Rav Chaim Vital, which the Chofetz Chaim brings very often, the soul itself has 248 components, the Jewish soul. The body has 248 parts to correspond to every one of those components of the soul. We have 248 positive commandments. Each commandment corresponds to what? To that part of the body, and it corresponds to the soul, and it creates a spiritual energy which infuses that component of the soul to be advanced, to become part of eternity. So there's a correlation. 248 positive commandments, 248 parts of the body, and the body has to have 248 parts. Of course, it's the vestment of the soul, which is 248, and has 248 components. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't need the physical vestment, meaning the garments which Aaron had worn, and his children had worn, because his body was the original vestment which God created. That's the understanding. 248. When Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, he was disenfranchised. He was no longer the Adam who was meant to address the objective of creation. Avraham Avinu, introducing God to the world, which was a total pagan world, he was the founding father of the Jewish people. And ultimately, his progeny were going to receive the Torah at Sinai, which is the ultimate objective of creation. I created the world for the Torah, which is the chosen. And for the people who are the chosen, they're the nation which will actually live by the Torah. And through their challenges within that context, the world will reach its objective of advancing itself spiritually speaking. I will make your name greater. I will add the letter Hey to your name. And what happens when you become Hey? Now Avraham numerically is 248. So what does the number 248 represent? 248 means Adam, when he ate of the tree of knowledge, he actually had reduced himself. He was no longer that functional 248 person. Avraham, now you're 248. Now the ultimate soul, which is 248. Now you have the vestment being circumcised. You take full control over your physicality. So now your physicality functions within the context of spirituality. Now your vestment has been restored. And as a result of that, now you're ready to meet the challenge to launch the dynamic which ultimately will bring about the Jewish people who at Sinai will receive the 248 commandments. Because Avraham Avinu, although he fulfilled the Torah's entirety, including rabbinic laws, he was not commanded. It was on a non-obligatory level. Avraham Avinu, he had 7 no-hide laws, which every non-Jew has. In addition, he was given the mitzvah, the positive commandment, to circumcise himself. The circumcision, as we discussed many times, was to correct and to temper the evil of the tree of knowledge, because the foreskin of the circumcision was only an outgrowth of that evil. Avraham achieved the level of perfection within himself at the age of 99. God says now, by removing that foreskin, which is the expression of that evil, you will temper it and you'll take control over that and you'll minimize it. And therefore, you'll be able to function as that spiritual being within a physical existence. Therefore, Avraham was the 248 person, and he himself was the founding father of the Jewish people, because to have any relevance to the 248 of the Torah, of the Positive Commandments, you have to be, in your physicality, you have to be whole in 248. That's what we've discussed. That's what we explained. That's 248. But in addition, we explained that when God created the world, there's a verse in Tehillim where David HaMelech says, "B'ko Hashem tzur lamim," with the appellation of Yud Hey, which is one of the unpronounceable names of God, I created the worlds. So the Talmud says in 2 locations, with the spirituality of the letter Yud, I created the world to come, the total spiritual world. And with the spirituality within the Hey, which is the second letter of Ka, I created the physical world. When God created this physical world, what exactly is the physical world? Just not a physical world. The physical world is the playing field to meet all the challenges of the Torah. And therefore, the Midrash tells us what was the blueprint for creation, for physical creation. The blueprint for physical creation and spiritual was the Torah itself. Because the only reason why anything exists within existence, only because it has relevance to the challenge that were challenged within 248 and within 365, 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. So there's a correlation in creation, in existence, physical existence, to be able to meet the challenges at every one of these levels, that if we succeed, we advance ourselves in every aspect of the Torah itself. Okay? So the hay was the spirituality which created the physical world, which is the physical, that's where the challenges take place. When Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, what happened to that world that was created with the hay? It was putrefied. It became a non-functional world within the context that initially was meant to function to accommodate 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. The human being who will walk the face of that earth is already handicapped. He has no relevance to 248, and he has no relevance to 365, which is the ultimate number of order, which is the rotation of the world. That's 365. Avraham, when he was able to achieve that level of perfection within himself, God says at the age of 99, now you're ready to be circumcised. Because you've achieved this level within yourself that you've affected and you've purged and expunged the evil within yourself to a degree. Now you're ready to take over, to take control, to be reinstated to 248 and 365. But you can't function in a world that's a tainted world. So what does God do? God adds the letter Hey, and what I'm saying now is a midrash, to Avram's name, and God says the Hey, which had initially the energy to create a whole world, the physical world, I'm recreating you, that you are become the equivalent of all existence, except your existence is not tainted. It's a new Hey. So Avraham Avinu being the Hey, which is untainted, uncompromised, what happens? What does that world represent? That's the world of good. The world of the world which was tainted, which was corrupted as a result of ingesting the tree of knowledge, that's a representative of evil. So who's the counterbalance to existence? Avram's on one side of the equation, the rest of the world is on the other side of the equation. Although Avram lives within the physical world, but what he's subject to, what he's bound to, although he's a physical being, but his dimension and his nakedness is a new existence. That's Avram. So when he was given the name Avraham, now you are Ramach. Now you're 248. You've been created, recreated. You're a new existence. You are a representation of the good, which ultimately your progeny will advance that and establish the eternity through receiving the Torah at Sinai. That's Avraham. Now, so when we speak about I will make you great, you'll have a son, you say Eloki Avram, Eloki Yitzchak, Eloki Yaakov. But how would you conclude the bracha? Not with all of them. Because why was that new world? Why was God able to be the God of Abraham? The Midrash tells us that before the building in the Mishkan, where was God's presence? God's presence, which is the equivalent of the Holy of Holies, was with Avram. Avram was the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. After Avram passes away, where was the divine presence, which is equivalent to the Holy of Holies, where Yitzchak was? After Yitzchak passes away, where was God's presence, the equivalent of Holy of Holies? Where Yaakov was. But if they themselves were part of that original world, which was tainted with the evil, you can't be the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. Because the terrestrial level was invalidated, that God has no relevance to it any longer. It's only because Avram is a new creation. He's the creation of the hay, which is untainted. Therefore, Avraham has the capacity to be the location for the divine presence, the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. So why was Yitzchak that equivalent and Yaakov that equivalent? It's not something they created. Who was the cause of the recreation of existence? Avraham. So we speak about Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Yaakov. Each of them was the location of God's presence. But who do we attribute it to? To Avraham. It's only because they were born in a new world, because they were the child of Avraham, and Yitzchak was the father of Yaakov. Therefore, how do we conclude the bracha? Look at Avraham. Everything's attributed to Avraham. That's what we exclaim. Just reviewing it totally to see the full picture. Okay? Now, the Gemara tells us that the original intention of creation was that God's presence should be on the terrestrial level with the human being, except because Adam failed, and as I said, he putrefied existence, God had to remove himself. On an individual level, when did God come back to the terrestrial level with Avraham? Avraham was the Merkava. He was the location of the presence. Avraham walked the physical world. That's a physical world. So now, but initially, God's intention was he should be fully involved with the whole world. Avraham is the precursor to the Mishkan. The Mishkan was, and therefore the Gemara tells us that the joy God had when the Mishkan took on a permanent status on the 8th day, when Aaron and his children were installed, and that's the Torah tells us how the Shekhinah had come down and consumed the sacrifices. That day was the equivalent of the joy God had when he first created creation. When he first created creation, his location was on the terrestrial level. From then till now, this is the first time it's happened again. That's the Mishkan, because that was the full intent. But what was partially addressing that? What was the precursor to that? That God was on the terrestrial level, but it was only on a very limited level. That was the situation of the patriarchs. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Yaakov. Each of them in their own right were the equivalent of Holy Holies, but that was personal to them, had no relevance to anything else. The Mishkan, that Mishkan, God dwells within every Jew. That is the medium through which God has a relationship with every single Jew. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov was something to do with them, not even the children. It was them. So when was it fully accomplished? We achieved this level that the original intent of creation was addressed, was met with the building of the Mishkan. And therefore it's Vayhi b'yom hashmini, as it says, it was on the 8th day, and it says, and it was the first day or the second and third day, which was the same language used by creation. God had the same level of joy as he had initially by creation. Okay? Now, so I just thought of this on Shabbos. The Torah, the Gemara tells us that a non-Jew is not permitted to study Torah. He's only permitted to study the laws which pertain to himself, which are the 7 Noahide laws. But outside the 7 Noahide laws, he's not permitted to study. And now the question is, what is the severity of the non-Jew studying the laws, the Torah, which is that has no relevance to him? So the Gemara quotes a pasuk. We say it's a pasuk, it's a verse in the Torah. It's the first verse you teach a child when he begins speaking. Torah tzivah Moshe, Morasha Kilas Yaakov. The Torah was commanded us by Moshe. It is the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. Now, we know in Hebrew, the letter shin and sin are the exact same letter, but the pronunciation, whether it's an SH or just an S, is determined where you put the dot. Do you put it on the right side or the left side of that letter? But in terms of the letter, it's the same letter. So the Gemara says, the word morasha, it's a shin. It should not be read shin. What is it alluding to? Moroso. Erusin in Hebrew means betrothed. That the Torah itself is the betrothed of the congregation of Yaakov. If a woman is betrothed to a man, it's his wife, and God forbid, somebody else has intimacy with that woman, it's called adultery. So the Torah, when it was given to the Jewish people, it's Morosa Yaakov, it's the betrothed of the Jewish people. So the non-Jew who engages with that, it's the equivalent, crossing that line, it's like committing adultery. He's engaging in something which is a level of desecration, unconscionable violation, therefore he's subject to the death penalty. Not in the Beis Din, but between him and God, this person becomes persona non grata on the most extreme level. How do you have a right? It's the betrothed of the Jewish people. You have no right to partake of that. How do we understand it? In addition, the Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that a non-Jew, we say it every day, every Shabbos, in the Shachar service, the Shabbos was given to the Jew, not to the non-Jew. A non-Jew is not permitted to observe the Shabbos. And the Gemara tells us, Akab Shishovas Chayv Misa. A non-Jew who observes the Shabbos, he's liable for the death penalty. That's how extreme it is. What did he do so terrible? He wants to behave like a Jew, but he's not a Jew. So why is there such a extreme reaction that he deserves the death penalty? So let's understand. The Gemara tells us that Shabbos is Me'ein Olam Haba. The day of Shabbos, although it's a 24-hour day, it's the 7th day of the week, but it has a semblance of the world to come. What is the world to come? The world to come is having a special relationship with God. When the person departs and he goes to the world to come, you have a level, as we discuss, of connection to God, which is the ultimate, which is the absolute, in every sense of absolute. And that relationship is the ultimate in terms of benefit. And that's why God created the world, that if man succeeds, he's qualified to have that relationship. Shabbos is Me'ein Olam Haba. It's a semblance of that. Now, when God created the world, and Adam putrefied the world, which world did he putrefy? He actually violated the dictate of the tree of knowledge on the 6th day. The 7th day didn't exist yet. The 7th day, God entered into existence. That day was not subject to the corruption and the infusion of the evil into that day. That day is the original perfect creation, and therefore God has a relationship with that day. And that's why the Gemara tells us that although holidays, festivals, the Sanhedrin has to sanctify the moon to have that holiday, from the very beginning of creation, the 7th day of the week is innately holy. The rabbinical court doesn't have to sanctify it because God's there. That's God's day. Lahavdil Elv Abdullah. I once received an almanac many years ago in the mail. Didn't order it. And the Christians, you know what they refer to Sunday? As the day of the Lord. That's the way the Christians refer to Sunday. It's the day of the Lord. Lahavdil Elv Abdullah. That is the reality of what Shabbos is. It's God's day. Only God's day. Now, let's understand something. It's terrific. A person is not permitted to do creative activity on Shabbos. The concept of creative activity, just to give you an example, the 10 levels of activity we need to process foods. Before the sin of the tree of knowledge, the whole concept of a husk, the concept that food had to be processed to be fully edible didn't exist. Because that you have to process something, remove husks. This is all it's a lack of perfection. So the lack of perfection only came about only as a result of Adam putrefying existence. He brought the world to a much lesser level. When we were in the desert, we had the manna. Any conceivable thought we had in our mind that we should be nourished at that level, it took on that value of food. The food was absorbed in their inner organs. It was pure, it was purely spiritual. This is the equivalent of what? Of the radiance that the soul will benefit in the world to come. That was the man. The Gemara cites a pasuk, it's the sustenance of the angels. Angels have no relevance to physicality. They have no relevance to impurity. The Jews, when we were in the desert for 40 years, when we had manna, our sustenance, we were in this spiritual cocoon. The heavenly clouds was God's presence. The manna, again, is that spiritual infusion, purely spiritual. There's no waste. Therefore, they did not do their bodily functions. The Berushal Miriam was a miracle. It wasn't just ordinary water. What does it mean? The Gemara tells us, Lo nidna Torah el ochli aman. The Torah was given to those who ate the man. What do you mean they ate the man? Because what is the Torah? The intent of the Torah was to be in a context where there's no impurity. That's all. When we ate the man, we assumed the spiritual level that our sustenance, our function was all rooted and based upon what? Spiritual nourishment. Pure nourishment. There was no impurity of that nourishment. So we were fully able to absorb it into our souls. The Torah we studied for those 40 years, for that reason. If the Jews wouldn't have sinned with the golden calf, what would have been? We reverted back to pre-sin of Adam. But because we violated the law of idolatry, we reverted back to post. Otherwise, the world would have reached its level of perfection, fully reinstated. But since ultimately we leave the clouds of glory, when we come to the promised land after 40 years, we revert back again now. Avraham says something phenomenal. We read in the desert, the Jews, every Jew had to have a spade on his backpack. Why? So the Torah says explicitly, because when you do your bodily functions, the chisisa is seosecha. You have to cover the human excrement. And if you don't cover it, it's a breach of Hayom Achnecha Kodesh. The camp of the Jewish people has to be pure and holy. And if there's human waste, that besmirches it and that minimizes the holiness. So therefore you have to dig a hole and cover it over. So the Gemara asks, but if the manna was absorbed in our inner organs, there was no waste. So the Gemara answers, the Talmud answers, there were times when we purchased food from caravans, nomads who traveled, which was ordinary food. So when we ate that food, the body expelled waste. What is that waste? That waste is a representation of the evil of the Eitz Hadas. And because it's only represents the evil of the Eitz Hadas, it's something which is putrefied. Therefore, it has to be buried and covered for that reason. But the manna which was pure, which had no negative aspect to it, is pure holiness. Therefore, it can be fully absorbed into the person's neshama for that reason. So during that 40 years, what were we? We lived literally as angels. The physical needs, there was nothing. Now, so why are you not permitted to do creative activity on Shabbos? What is Shabbos? Shabbos is Me'en Olam Haba. It's the assemblage of the world to come. If it's that, all creative activity has no relevance. Has no relevance whatsoever. Because all that creativity only came about as a result of being expelled from the Garden of Eden. Because the world took on a lesser function. Now man has to go and be creative to make something available for his ingestion for other things, for that reason. Therefore, Shabbos, you're not permitted to do malacha. There's negative losasko malacha. There's tishbos. You have to refrain. Now, how is Shabbos referred to? Shabbos Lashem Elokecha. The day is designated for God. That's what it's designated for. It's God's day. The day of Hashem. Okay? So Shabbos is a day which is untainted. And the Jew, only because he has that untainted status, he has relevance to that day. So the non-Jew who was created with the hay which was putrefied, he can't go into that domain. He can't partake of that existence. Because Shabbos is what? Is Me'en Olam Haba. Therefore, the non-Jew is not permitted to actually observe the Shabbos, because if he observes the Shabbos, that means he's partaking of the divine presence, which is untainted. You don't make the grade. You don't belong there. And therefore, crossing that line, subjects you to a level of what? Of liability, which carries the death penalty. Doesn't mean the court will put him to death, but it means that has that level of severity for that reason. Now, the Torah itself, the Gemara tells us, it's also Zohar, Yisrael v'Oraisa kutshu b'richu chatu. The Torah, the Jewish people, God, and the Torah all intertwined in one. What is the catalyst? What attaches us to God? Not only that, we mentioned him in the Ramban. Every letter of the Torah is one of God's names. The Torah is God's name. The bedrock of Torah, its holiness, is because it's God's names. Every letter. So who can have that? So when we study the Torah, what goes through our minds? What do we verbalize? What are we involved in? It's the direct connection to God himself. But the world has no relevance to that because they have a tainted status. The only one who could approach God, it's only the Jewish people, because they were created with a new creation, because the hay that Avraham himself was given, he was in an untainted world. That created an untainted world. So the non-Jew cannot study the Torah because the Torah itself is godliness itself. It's like observing the Shabbos, going into an area, a domain, which doesn't have any relevance to the evil of the Eitz Hadas, of the tree of knowledge. Why do we say, what is the antidote for the evil inclination? Why is the Torah the Tavlin? Because the Torah itself, being God himself, the evil inclination represents the tree of knowledge, the evil tree of knowledge. When you engage in Torah as you should engage in Torah, you deflect the evil inclination. You achieve a level of clarity, evil nature cannot approach you. Why? Because he can't cross into that domain. Because that domain of Torah has no relevance to evil, which is the evil inclination. He is the representation of that. We find that of the three patriarchs, which patriarch represented the Torah? Personified the Torah. That was Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu is depicted by the Torah. He's the man of the tent. Yaakov Ishtam Yoshe Goholim. Which tent? The tent of Torah. Yaakov, when he fled from his father-in-law, it says he crossed the Yabok River, and he was all by himself. All of a sudden, he was attacked by an angel, and he fought with the angel till dawn. And could you imagine a human being fighting with an angel? It's not possible. Yaakov Avinu had the fortitude and the ability to battle with an angel, and he wrestled with the angel. Finally, the angel saw he wasn't going to beat Yaakov. Who is this angel? So Chazal tells, the Midrash tells, he was Samach Mem. He was the archangel of Edom, of Esav, which represents evil. He tried to destroy Yaakov, did not succeed. Finally, he injured him. He dislocated his hip. That's what he did. But otherwise, he couldn't. Why couldn't he? Because since Yaakov himself, his essence was Torah, and he was like par excellence, Borasi Yitzhak Borasi Torah. He was the ultimate antidote. He was the essence of that. Therefore, this representation of evil couldn't approach him. So it's a whole discussion. Why was he able to injure him regarding the hip? He had a lapse of thought for a moment for whatever reason. And that's what happened. But that's why Yaakov, he was the ultimate example of Torah as the antidote to the evil inclination. Because the Torah itself is godliness. The evil inclination can't approach that. When you're engaged in that, you're in a domain, he's not welcome. You can't cross that line. The moment you detach yourself from that, now you're on equal ground with the evil inclination. You could be affected. That's the understanding. A non-Jew has no share in the world to come. Kol Yisrael yesh lo mechelek l'mabo. Every Jew has a share in the world to come. We say at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, it's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin. The non-Jew only has a share in the world to come if he's Chasidei Umas Olam. He has to be from the righteous Gentiles of the world. He has to somehow be connected to the Jew to facilitate the Jew's service of God. So what is he? Then he has relevance to the world to come, but not on his own right, only because he's connected to the Jew. As we explained, the convert, how does the convert who's a non-Jew, when the person meets the prerequisites of conversion, what happens? So we explained the name of the Ramchal, it's like grafting a branch onto a tree. And if the graft is done right, it becomes part of the ecosystem of the tree. A semblance of that is the Chasidum Sa'olam, the righteous Gentiles of the world. If they meet the criteria of what a righteous Gentile is, they're attaching themselves to a degree. As a result of that, they're impacted, they become part of the system. Because they become part of the system, therefore, they could trail along and have relevance. But the ordinary non-Jew who doesn't meet the criteria to be classified as the righteous Gentiles, he has no share in the world to come. Now, it's interesting. As we said, a non-Jew is not permitted to study Torah. It's like committing adultery because the Torah itself is the betrothed of the Jewish people. And that happened at Sinai. What about a person who wants to convert to Judaism? The person has to study laws which will pertain to them right after they convert. So what are you permitted to teach them? Only the laws at a minimal level which has relevance to the conversion. More than that, you're not permitted to teach them. Because that, factually, right now, they're not Jewish. Not being a Jew, you're still part of that other level of classification. You represent the tainted world. It's only once you convert, now you're part of that new world. That's Avram's world, which is the hay, the untainted hay, that was the new creation. So why is the person studying when you teach the convert all the necessities of understanding to become a Jew? Because that's necessary to cross that to cross that bridge. But anything which has no relevance for that transition, you're not permitted to teach them. It's only because it has relevance to that connection you can teach them that. Otherwise, you're teaching a person who has that impurity something which is the ultimate, which you can't have a relationship with. Has no relevance to the objective. Therefore, you're not permitted to teach him Torah, even though he's converting because he's not a Jew yet. Not being a Jew yet, he's not permitted to study. Only the Torah, which has relevance for the transition to become a Jew. Alan's asking, if that's the case, how did it says that Avraham Eliezer was known as Domestic Eliezer, which is an acronym. He drew from the well springs of his teacher, Avraham, and he disseminated the Torah that Avraham disseminated. The Torah Avraham disseminated, which Torah? It had to do with 7 Noahide laws. Monotheism, even a non-Jew, is not permitted to be an idolater. A non-Jew studies his own, the Torah which pertains to him, he's permitted to study, which have Noahide laws, because that's within his level of obligation. So what it says, we spoke about the souls that Avraham made in Choron. He converted them. How did he convert them? Through teaching Torah. Which Torah? The Torah which pertained to the 7 Noahide laws. Outside of that, he didn't teach him. That we say that Avraham kept the Torah its entirety before it was given. That's Avraham personally. Eliezer didn't keep that. But Eliezer kept the 7 Noahide laws perfectly, as every non-Jew every Noahide is meant to keep. But he did not teach him that. So how did Avraham know it? How did Avraham know that? I mean, how was Avraham aware of the Torah's entirety before it was given? So the Midrash tells us when he was a fugitive and hiding in a cave for 13 years, God communicated the Torah's entirety to him. So God was his teacher. So God had chosen him that he was qualified, despite being uncircumcised, to be able to have knowledge of Torah's entirety, but it's on a non-obligatory level, as we explained. The value of non-obligatory is not the same as an obligatory level. So therefore, Avraham himself, he knew Torah and he delved in it because God taught it to him, communicated to him. Eliezer, he only taught him what? The 7 Noahide laws, because he was his so-called his agent to do the outreach, to bring monotheism to the world, and that is definitely permitted, because it's teaching the non-Jew what he's obligated to keep. Good, Alan.